So let's talk about World War II. You've probably heard of it, but it can feel like this huge, complicated thing from a long, long time ago. But here's the deal. It all kicked off on September 1st, 1939. On that day, Germany, led by a guy named Adolf Hitler, invaded its neighbor Poland. This wasn't just some random argument over a border, it was a deliberate act of aggression. Hitler wanted a massive German empire. He believed certain groups of people were inferior. This invasion was the first major step in his plan. It forced other countries to finally say enough. It was the final straw. Now, why did it get to this point? The world was still reeling from World War I. That war left Germany with a lot of debt and national shame. A thing called the Treaty of Versailles blamed Germany and made them pay. That crushed their economy. It created anger and desperation among the German people. Into that chaos, Hitler and the Nazi Party rose to power. They promised to restore greatness and blamed others. They offered simple, dangerous answers. This wasn't just a European problem. In Asia, the Empire of Japan had ambitions. Japan wanted to expand territory and control resources. China, Korea. They'd been at war with China for years before 1939. Germany's invasion of Poland is the European start date, but fires were burning worldwide. Those conflicts merged into a global struggle. Nations from almost every continent were pulled in. The invasion was the trigger, but causes ran deeper. Think of a pile of dry wood building for years. Economic depression, political instability, unchecked ambition, dangerous ideologies. The invasion was the match. Okay, so when a conflict gets this big, you need to know who's on what side. In World War II, the world basically split into two massive teams, the Axis powers and the Allied powers. Let's start with the Axis. Germany, Italy, Japan. They formed a pact to support each other's goals for expansion. Germany, under Adolf Hitler, wanted to dominate Europe. Italy, under Benito Mussolini, dreamed of a new Roman Empire around the Mediterranean. Japan, led by military leaders and Emperor Hirohito, aimed to control East Asia and the Pacific. These three nations were united by aggressive, militaristic, and anti-democratic governments. On the other side, the Allies, Great Britain, France. Their alliance grew over time. The Soviet Union, the United States. The Soviet Union, led by Joseph Stalin, had signed a non-aggression pact with Hitler at the start of the war. But Hitler broke that promise and invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, which immediately made Stalin switch sides. Then there's the United States. For the first 2 years of the war, the US tried really hard to stay out of it. The American public was largely isolationist. FDR saw the danger but had to move cautiously. He helped the Allies by sending supplies through the Lend-Lease Act. But the event that finally dragged America into the fight was Japan's surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. After that, staying neutral was no longer an option. The Allies, the Big Three, Great Britain, Winston Churchill, Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin, United States, FDR. They brought together enormous industrial power and manpower, joined by many other countries including Canada, Australia, China, which had been fighting Japan for years. The war wasn't just fought by soldiers, it was a battle of economies, factories, and entire societies, all mobilized to defeat the Axis and stop their campaign of global domination. World War II was a 6-year-long marathon of chaos. But a few key events completely changed the direction of the conflict. One of the first huge turning points was the attack on Pearl Harbor. On that quiet Sunday morning, December 7, 1941, Japanese planes swooped in and bombed the American fleet in Hawaii. The attack was a devastating short-term success for Japan, sinking and damaging numerous battleships. But in the long term, it was a colossal strategic mistake. It woke up a sleeping giant. The very next day, the United States declared war on Japan. A few days later, Germany declared war on the US. Italy declared war on the US. The war was now truly global. Fast forward to 1944. D-Day. Allies had been fighting for years to push back Axis forces in North Africa, Italy, the Eastern Front. To defeat Germany, they needed a massive new front in Western Europe. On June 6, 1944, the largest seaborne invasion in history launched. Over 150,000 Allied troops landed on Normandy's beaches. US troops landing, British troops landing, Canadian troops landing, troops from other nations landing. It was brutal and bloody with immense casualties, but soldiers secured a foothold. This began the end for Hitler in Europe. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, the war was different. It was fought across vast oceans, island to island. The Battle of Midway, June 1942, 6 months after Pearl Harbor. The US Navy had cracked Japanese naval codes and could anticipate the attack on Midway. In the battle, the US sank 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, the heart of Japan's fleet. The victory crippled the Japanese Navy, turned the tide in the Pacific, and put the Allies on the offensive. We must mention the Eastern Front, where Germany and the Soviet Union fought the largest, deadliest struggle in history. The Battle of Stalingrad, late 1942, early 1943, was a turning point. World War II wasn't just a war fought by soldiers on distant battlefields. It was a total war, which means it affected everyone, everywhere. Life on the home front, the civilian world back home, changed dramatically. In countries like Britain, cities were subjected to relentless bombing campaigns by the German Air Force, known as the Blitz. People had to spend their nights in bomb shelters or subway stations, never knowing if their homes would still be standing in the morning. Blackouts were enforced, meaning everyone had to cover their windows at night to prevent city lights from guiding enemy bombers. The constant fear and destruction became a part of daily life. With millions of men sent off to fight, women stepped up to fill the jobs they left behind. This was a massive social change. Women went to work in factories, building planes, tanks, munitions. Rosie the Riveter became a famous symbol in the United States, representing the millions of women who contributed to the war effort on the assembly line. This wasn't just about patriotism, it was a matter of survival. Without the labor of these women, the Allies could not have produced the overwhelming amount of material needed to win the war. For many women, this was their first taste of economic independence and a new sense of capability. Life also meant making sacrifices. Resources were scarce because everything was being funneled into the war effort. This led to widespread rationing of things like food, gasoline, rubber, and clothing. Families were given ration books with stamps that limited how much they could buy each week. People were encouraged to make do and mend and to grow their own food in victory gardens. This system was designed to ensure that everyone got a fair, albeit small share, and that the military had everything it needed. It was a constant, daily reminder that the entire nation was part of the struggle. For children, the war was a period of fear, disruption, and sometimes strange adventure. In Britain, millions of children were evacuated from cities to the countryside to protect them from the bombing. They were called evacuees and had to leave their families to live with strangers. Imagine being a young child, put on a train with a name tag pinned to your coat, not knowing where you were going or when you would see your parents again. For these children, the war meant a lost childhood, but also an experience that would shape their entire generation, forcing them to grow up far too quickly in a world turned upside down. By the spring of 1945, the end was in sight for Germany. After the success of D-Day, Allied forces pushed from the west, while the massive Soviet army advanced from the east. They were closing in on the German capital, Berlin, from both sides. Facing certain defeat, with his empire crumbling around him, Adolf Hitler died by suicide in his underground bunker in Berlin on April 30, 1945. A week later, on May 8, 1945, Germany officially surrendered. This day is known as VE Day, for Victory in Europe. Across the Allied world, massive celebrations erupted in the streets as one half of the devastating global conflict had finally come to an end. London, crowds cheering in the streets. New York, Times Square celebrations, flags and revelers. Paris, joyous streets, people embracing. But the war wasn't over. Japan was still fighting fiercely in the Pacific. The United States was planning a massive invasion of Japan, which military experts predicted would cost millions of lives on both sides. To avoid this, the new U.S. President, Harry Truman, made a world-changing decision. He authorized the use of a new, terrifying weapon, the atomic bomb. Trinity test, the first atomic explosion, mushroom cloud. On August 6, 1945, the first atomic bomb was dropped on the city of Hiroshima. 3 days later, a second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. The destruction was unlike anything the world had ever seen, killing hundreds of thousands of people instantly, and from radiation afterward. Faced with this unimaginable power, Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945, officially ending World War II. So, why do we still talk about this war? First, the sheer scale of it is mind-boggling. An estimated 70 to 85 million people died, making it the deadliest conflict in human history. This includes the Holocaust, the systematic state-sponsored genocide in which the Nazis and their collaborators murdered some 6 million European Jews. Remembering the war means honoring those victims and vowing to never allow such an atrocity to happen again. It forces us to confront the darkest parts of human nature and the catastrophic consequences of hatred, racism, and unchecked power. It's a stark reminder of what we are capable of, for better and for worse. Ultimately, World War II reshaped our world. It led to the fall of old empires, the rise of two new superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Kicking off the Cold War, it led to the creation of the United Nations. It accelerated technological development. It prompted massive social changes. Studying the war helps us understand the world we live in today, its borders, its alliances, and its ongoing struggles. It's not just a story from a history book, it's the story of how our modern world was forged in fire, and a lesson about the price of freedom and the cost of war that we